So here's some more red team tiers. So EDR behavior is the definition of insanity when EDR is configured correctly. So most EDRs at this point have transitioned to the kernel. Userland unhooking had a great run. It was about 2 or 3 years where we could just be like, unhook, and then nothing happens. And now most of them are in the kernel. They also monitor UTW. They monitor for patching. That's there are still blind spots, but the biggest thing that is a thorn in my side and a thorn in Steve's side and Ralph's side and Beau's side is the behavior is incredibly inconsistent. Like if I am testing payloads, all I can guarantee is that it will work once on one machine, and that's it. I am not kidding. If you bring down a payload to a host and you run it once and it works, if you were to just double click that same payload again, it will be blocked. And the original payload will be killed. This is the behavior of most EDRs now. And it's because they have this concession where they say, well, users have to be able to do their job, so we'll take the risk because we're an EDR, so we can monitor it as it happens. But now it's like a true bypass is incredibly rare. You can't just rename a DLL or put your name to the same process name as the EDR.
Every time somebody comes out with a new method, and even if it's a great method, as soon as everyone else knows about it, as soon as they talk about it, it's already in the works getting patched, right?
Oh, dude, not only that, but your payload, every time you run it, is getting analyzed.
Yes.
And so true bypasses are becoming rare. But the thing is, and this is how it works, occasionally we just find a random blind spot. We'll just be like, we're like on a recent engagement, it was a 2-month-long engagement against a super secure organization. We got detected by EDR on every single endpoint we established C2 on until we put a macro payload that ran an exe on a file share, and then nothing. The EDR at that point was like, we have checked out because we found after getting detected like approximately 6 times and burning 6 different assumed compromises machines, we found a blind spot that we have no idea. And also the customer is like, yeah, we don't know. Like there's not, they checked the exceptions. There's not an exception for it. They checked running the payload itself. And for whatever reason, the payload doesn't get detected. This is the exact same technique we used to build all the other payloads. It's the same shellcode. It's the same domains. We have no idea why, but we found this blind spot in this EDR and started, fight like that. Then after that happened, we got 60 beacons within 2 days. So after we landed a safe place from the EDR, we start expanding massively our C2 footprint in this environment. So exceptions are amazing, but they're really hard to find. And they're all oftentimes scoped super specifically to like one directory that is usually not writable. I actually have sort of a tool idea in the works where it's like brute force. You just drop an ICAR signature into every single directory on the host.
Oh my God.
I haven't actually implemented that. It's probably a terrible idea, but that's one way to find the exceptions is to find every writable directory and drop an ICAR signature into every single one. Which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically a kill me program.
This is a good, I think, transition to say that this is hard and they're hard to find and all that stuff. But as a red teamer, you don't have to know everything. And hopefully you have a team of people you work with, because hence team in red team, right? To where I think I see a lot of people put the pressure on themselves. Oh, I'm coming up on an engagement. I have to learn how to bypass this kernel EDR and all this stuff by myself. Where do I start? And it's like, let somebody else do the heavy lifting. And like Corey said, don't worry about getting detected. We're trying to find those thresholds of detection, because you could use one payload and maybe the detection is shellcode injection, and you try another one that was like executable ran from an unknown location. One of those may get overlooked by the SOC. So,
right.
That's why we test. But again, like Corey said, it may be you test it in one environment and it works fine, and then move it, and you never know how it's going to work in the other environment.
Idea of a single person nowadays and continuing into the future being able to just by themselves go from 0 to the entire stage is if you can do that, that's amazing. Hey, we're hiring. But it's getting harder, right? Like you need a team of people, like you said, to your point, to actually make that successful. And sometimes people bring in those little pieces that they've been working on. So
oh yeah, at Black Hills we have we have JOF, and he's the malware development team, and he just does nothing but try to bypass EDRs. and it's not easy. Most of the time, it's just him complaining about how Elastic is a huge pain, and it's just like, he does amazing work, and he's incredibly smart. But at the end of the day, he's going against a company that, again, probably just secured another $200 million in Series A funding. So it's like a guy versus
one versus
huge...
many, right?
Yes,
exactly. So continuing, more red team tiers. Any other like fail stories? So what do you think about cloud, Beau? What do you think? Give me your tiers.
So you got just both thoughts on there, but please, Ralph, Steve, guys, like jump in. I ended up making like a short list of things because I knew this was coming up, and I've, over the years, have had some interesting stuff. I already told the story about the DNS thing. The other thing, so you mentioned cease and desist. One of the more interesting ones is something we do pretty often is where we'll clone a website, right? So, where we'll maybe have like our phishing landing page on a cloned website that is, so if you have just, drive-by scanners, it doesn't look like anything malicious. It's just like a normal website, right? So one of the things that I had done is clone a website, but I didn't block like the rest of the internet, and which is probably a good idea. Instead of just allowing the target to it, and ended up having the target organization had something similar to the doppelganger protection, where they saw a scanner that was basically just doing like wget recursively on their website, and then they navigated to it and said, oh well, now this site is trying to pretend to be us, right? And immediate cease and desist for that. That shut down. So by the way, you get a cease and desist on GoDaddy, they just cut your whole account down.
Just cut it off.
All same with Cloudflare. Same with
Cloudflare.
Ralph about his Cloudflare.
Oh yeah. So I'll just share the super short story about Cloudflare. I used an account that had some other domains on it, and what they will do is they will ban every single domain that's in that account, regardless of whether it's associated, for life.
So I will say, honestly, some vendors are really cool. Like DigitalOcean's a great example. There's others, like DigitalOcean will be like, is this you with this fish? Is it all good? And you're like, yeah, we're a pen testing shop. It's fine. They're like, okay, cool. Keep on going. Also, I had like an email, I think it was Mailgun or something. They were like, hey, you're hitting the rate limit and you're like doing really weird stuff. I was like, I'm a pen tester. They're like, okay, you're good. We've removed the limits from your account. I'm like, thank you for understanding. Like, I'm just trying to make clients more secure. I'm not actually a bad guy.
Right.
So yeah.
So in terms of cloud, like double-edged sword, right? And guys, again, like tell me your thoughts on this, because from my point of view, in basically kind of pivoting to doing just red teaming and just cloud, I feel like over the years we have kind of evolved more towards an approach of just trying to get access to cloud resources. And the reason is it's two things, right? Like one, trying to get a shell on somebody's system has gotten a lot harder, right? But secondly, data, like sensitive data, has gotten moved to things like SharePoint, right? People are storing things that they probably shouldn't, just in a network share that's in the cloud now. And so, double-edged sword wise, right? Like it is different in the sense that we are attacking it differently. But in the cases where we do have success, where we phish somebody, get access to a cred, a lot of times now. Instead of necessarily needing to get on-prem, we're able to kind of access this stuff in the cloud. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I feel like cloud is one of those things where it's like, hey, this is, once you get in, it is extremely, I think, usually wide open. Like you said, there's tools you can run. They'll pull every single attribute from a cloud environment, look at weak attributes like, Road Recon or Microburst, or like there's so many awesome tools out there. But getting access to that cloud environment, and I think the cloud being a double-edged sword more applies when you're talking about traditional business practices, how they change when you go to the cloud. So like if you're an on-prem AD focused hacker, a customer that uses Okta for everything is going to look like an unhackable target to you because they don't have AD. They don't have Active Directory certificate services. They don't have Windows. It's going to seem unhackable. But then you realize, oh, well, if I get into the cloud environment, all the accounts have read access to these keys. And also, a lot of the times, Beau and I were talking about this. If you run a Bloodhound scan on traditional on-prem AD, it's going to get detected. If you start running a ton of AD or Road Recon or whatever tools, or sorry, AWS tools, their chances of getting detected at least automatically are pretty low. And Beau was talking about some cool bypasses you could do with some of these cloud tools where you hit an unused API or a beta version of an API that contains the same data, or you hit an API with the wrong version or something like that. So basically, I think enumerating and exploiting the cloud is stealthier and potentially easier. However, that entry into the cloud, especially when you have like as a service offerings for a lot of things. Like one example is I did a pen test, and this is years ago now, but it was a company that had it was a cardholder data environment, and it was all as a service offerings in AWS. So like the data environment wasn't Microsoft SQL, it wasn't, Oracle SQL. It was just like DynamoDB or whatever, or Athena, or like these weird as a service offerings. As an attacker, I'm like, okay, I know the data's in there and I need to figure out how to get it out. And that poses a challenge. I know how to dump Microsoft SQL servers all day. I know how to do that. I know how to, use Oracle, TNS, and all that stuff. What I don't know how to do is like provision a key that has access rights to Amazon DynamoDB and then use Boto 3 or whatever, like Amazon libraries to figure out how I can do bad things, right? So that's like, it's a learning curve, right? And like, as you add these complexities in third-party tools, a lot of the times they are easy targets, but we don't necessarily know where they are or how to exploit them a lot of the time. So,
and you've got 2 weeks to do it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, more thoughts,
I'll comment on that real quick. So on the logging side, right? So you mentioned the visibility. I think that a lot of organizations are getting more mature in how they're logging in the cloud. However, I will say that between just learning how to do it, right? How to actually get the logs, send them to a SIEM, analyze them, and the fact that cloud logging still has a lot of issues. And people, dude, like I watched a talk from there was a conference over the last couple of days called Forward Cloud Sec, and I watched a talk somebody who showed 3 different ways to bypass CloudTrail logging. And it was just like, it's so badass. Like there's still so much to find in terms of like bypasses and how to get around how the cloud services are logging. Like it's still so new that it's there's still ways to break it.
for sure.
And then on the other side of it, like you mentioned, like trying to get access to understand how to like pull data from like a database. Like that's a really good example because it is different, right? It's not like just you have this server where you just send a request to it like a traditional network protocol request, but you can. And that's the thing that I think that is really one of the big things is like with cloud is like you have multiple ways. They're different in a lot of cases, but you have multiple ways to do access. So like in that case, you can actually open up ports to directly access SQL servers, or in the case of the web portals, and this is what I think is actually really fascinating about cloud environments, is that in a lot of cases through the web portal natively, so like an Azure's portal, right? You can literally run SQL queries on SQL databases in the web browser, right? Which is really cool.
So getting that console access, if you know how to do it, and the user that you're targeting has that, then you're in. I mean, after that, if and this is where we'll, information stealers and token theft and all that stuff. But like, getting into the cloud, typically more difficult. Once you're in, it is usually smooth sailing from there.
And here's another big thing that I would say, like from a blue team win, red team fail with regards to using cloud. So in the world of software as a service versus the world of infrastructure as a service, you have 2 very clear different API paths in most cases, and permission schemas. And so one big thing that happens is if we phish somebody, like if we do a cred capture, password spray somebody, get access to anybody in an organization's cred, which is usually like a win, right? In most cases, that's like a big win. In most cases, standard users only have access to like Azure Active Directory and maybe SharePoint and Teams and the productivity side, right? Whereas, that there is a clear boundary in the cloud where most users aren't going to be able to see infrastructure. They're not going to be able to see the databases. They're not going to be able to see the VMs unless they've been explicitly given that access. And I think that's one big win of like cloud infrastructure is that, now if we phish somebody, like historically, we phish somebody, we get access to their system. We can access, all the systems. We can do network scanning, all that kind of stuff, right?
Right. Yeah.
But in this case now with cloud phishing, right, we get access to like their, SharePoint and email basically.
So we've talked about we've shared many red teaming tiers, right? We've collectively complained about the state of the industry and said that blue teamers are God. But what can we do as red teamers? So, or as like a pen testing company, what can you do? So I think first it starts with reframing failure. So the first thing I want to say, if you're a red teamer and you get detected or you feel like you're failing, don't give up. Force the IR procedure. If they say, hey, we saw you log into AWS, you say, okay, cool. Now figure out how to keep me from doing this again, or kick me out, burn my account, eradicate me from the environment, block my C2s. And I'm not saying make it adversarial. It should be collaborative at that point. I think once you get detected, you should have a collaboration with your customer, or if you're a blue teamer, you should have a conversation with the red team to say, okay, should we run IR? Well, maybe if it's like a production SQL database, we won't run IR because the first step in IR is quarantine the machine, and there's 10,000 users on it, so maybe we shouldn't do that. Even just having the client walk you through what they would do and document, okay, here's what we would do. We would quarantine the machine, isolate it in CrowdStrike. Then we would take a forensic image. Then we would, investigate payloads, run them through VirusTotal, whatever your procedure is, force them to actually do it, because you can be watching the clock that whole time and say, well, until they hit that quarantine button, that is all potentially time that you can be doing things. And even if you aren't actually doing it, noting that somewhere and saying, well, we had 27 hours until you detected it, and then you would have quarantined it, can be useful.
Yeah, the other one too. I was just going to say one other thing to follow that on is, like, in the past about like password lockouts, right? Typically we try to avoid that at all costs, right? Because it causes disruption. But that's a time when failure should be turned into how, like, anyone can do this. I'm not special, right? I'm just someone on the internet who would perform that, right? How do you go through the process and prevent that from being an outage, right? Because that could be an attack surface, right?
Totally.
So just thinking about that failure, like, that's not something we want to do, but it's definitely happened. And to your point about this, going through that and being like, all right, how do we walk this line so we know what to do?
Yeah. Getting caught is good. Like, finding that detection threshold, like, I'll talk about scoping in a little bit, but like, truthfully, you should never design an engagement where it's considered successful if there's no detections. That is the opposite of a successful engagement. Like, find those thresholds. Maybe talk to the customer and say, hey, run this. Let's run it 5 different other ways. Turn it into a purple team, right? You've gotten that detection. Turn it into, now it's a collaboration. Also, show me your full response capabilities. Show me all the C2 domains. Can you identify them? What are they? Show me other artifacts or tell me a list of the hosts that we've compromised, or, show me other phishing emails we sent, like correlate our traffic, or show us our source IPs or whatever. I think, I'm trying to build this bridge between red and blue, and it's there with our customers. Every blue teamer and a red teamer out there, we're all on the same team. We're all working together against the real bad guys. Like in that example I talked about with the phishing campaign that Steve sent, what we ended up doing is the customer was like, hey, even though this failed and we quarantined or whatever, what if we just ran it? Like, what if we did it with an assumed compromised account? So we run the phish, we run all the way through, and then Steve went and enumerated all the access that user would have if it was like a legitimate success. So the easiest way to start the assumed compromise part of the test is to say, let's simulate if this attack worked, or a best case scenario. And then you could basically start from there and say, if our email gateway wasn't working, or if a user did decide to click it, and then what would happen? So, and it really is, like, I like to use the doctor analogy quite a bit. When you go to the doctor, they check your pulse, they check your blood pressure. They, like, even though, maybe if you go to the ER and you're like bleeding all over the place, they'll probably still check your pulse and your blood pressure. They're going to get your vitals. Phishing and detections are like the pulse. Like, that if you can phish an organization successfully, they are the equivalent of dead. Like, not really, but seriously, like, if you can walk in, no email gateway, and phish and get a 40% click rate, that patient needs immediate care. Like, so, and same with, like, checking the blood pressure. That's a great example. Like, if they don't have EDR and they don't have good, like, relatively coverage on the endpoint when it comes to like payload detection, that is like having high blood pressure. It might not kill you right now, but it will kill you eventually to not have good endpoint protection.
So the other thing too, and I know we're talking about failures, is that we deal with a lot of organizations that are very large, right? And so a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, they have budget to do this. There are a ton of small organizations, small businesses that don't have this same purview, and but they're just as vulnerable. They have just as much to lose, right? Maybe it's not the kind of data, but people are going for money. So.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. And then that's like, like I said, this is a biased talk where we're talking about organizations with large,
Yep.
At Black Hills, we typically talk people out of red teams, not into them. So the only people that are ending up on our plates are the companies that are like, bring the pain. We want to, wreck our environment. And yeah, try again. Like, I think Steve put in this research, read blogs, practice, like, what did you do wrong? Do an after action report. Like I'm sure now Steve already has 15 other ideas for how he could do that same device code phish. And we've already moved on to other techniques. Like so it's like,
nope, we're going to try it again.
Hit him
honestly,
again.
Though, okay, this is great. Honestly, you could do it again and succeed. That's the crazy thing.
Yeah, and like we said, like before, we even landed in the inboxes. So what if we just sent them slower this time than instead of 100, batch of 100? You know what I mean?
Sure.
There's always different things you can try.
Yes. Yeah, you have knobs you can mess with.
I've had like a really, really short story. I did a physical and I walked in and the security guard didn't stop me, but then they came around the corner and found me and they're like, "Oh, we caught you," right? And client went back and they were like, I wonder if we could do it again. So they sent someone else, not me, to do it like months later, and they just walked in and nothing happened. So I mean, it's one of those scenarios, right? Like and this was the physical standpoint. You could apply this to other stuff. Like you could catch someone the first time, but you might not catch them all the time.
Yeah, it's just like your EDRs and your WAFs and whatever protection that you're talking about. We assume that they're keeping us secure, but we don't lean too hard on those assumptions. That's why we test. That's why we practice.
Yes, exactly. You might say, "Oh, we'll definitely get you on the endpoint." Then we just get lucky and find a crazy we find something. Change tactics. Get weird. That's what we can do. So, email phishing, honestly, nowadays, we sort of think of it as a last resort. It is the last thing we want to try because of what I outlined. 2% click rates, immediate user reports, all the IR teams know exactly how to respond. It's super fast. What about Teams? Not everyone knows how to block a Teams sender or knows, definitely very few people know how to remove a Teams message from someone's inbox. I don't even know. I mean, I'm assuming you can do it with like the API. But like, this is a great example. WebEx phishing, Slack phishing, Yammer phishing, smishing, vishing, all the ishings. Like, seriously, they're like, think outside the box. If you like, this is what we do a lot of the times on red teams. We just sit down and we say, what can we do that we've never done before? What is weird? What can we?
And literally, I go through Microsoft services and just be like, "Can I send with this? Can I send with this? Can I send with this?
Yes.
Can I send you a birthday invite?"
Yeah, for real. Like, also, like we've done this recently using external services. Like, almost every company has like a contact us form. Does it allow file uploads? Does it allow? Is there open registration? A lot of these companies set these services up and then they totally forget about them. Like, they have some like join our community of customers or whatever, and you could just join and then post a forum that says, forum post that says, "Hey guys, please help me," or whatever. Like, here's a PDF with a link in it, or here's a zip with an executable or whatever. We've recently been hitting job applications. So, we have some really promising IT candidate that has a personal website that might have some malware hosted on it. And, you apply for a job and you say, "Oh yeah, my resume, I couldn't upload it. Please just see my personal website for all my resume and information." And this is like a long con, right? Because who knows, is it going to be HR? Is it going to be IT? Is it going to be the manager? It's kind of a watering hole attack. You're just sort of saying, will it work? We don't know, but we're trying weird stuff because that's where we're backed into this corner where it's like, okay, they're starting to get a little weird.
Will it blend?
Yeah. So another one I really like is going assume compromise really early, like from day one. Just give us a valid account. We can do internal spear phishing. We can look at your cloud services. We can try to use your SFTP server. We can like skip all the, hacking our way in and just start with assume like insider threat from the outside. And you can do that at the same time as you do the red team. You can say like, yes, we phished you, it didn't work. Then we did an internal phish with the same campaign and it worked. And also, this is a little hot tip for red teamers. Don't use traditional C2. C2 is super detectable. CrowdStrike has billions of dollars going into detecting Cobalt Strike.
Oh.
Use SSH. Like, seriously, like, it's not a joke. Use SSH. It's natively installed on most Windows boxes.
For
it
now.
Functions as a C2.
Even when it's not, I've brought it with me
Yes, you can
and
bring
then
it on.
SSH'd
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Or if they're like, nah, we block SSH. But you allow like port 53 out or something like that. And then we just retooled SSH to match the ports that you do allow out.
Yeah, for sure. So like also Quick Assist. It's in the Microsoft Store. It is basically, it's remote screen sharing, but it's signed. It's Microsoft signed. You set up. It is like a beautiful ruse. You tell the user, "Hey, go in your start menu, type Quick Assist. It's either installed or it's in the Microsoft Store." Then they connect to you, and you have the control over their computer. And spoiler alert: this is what real attackers do. They don't use. Well, some of them use Cobalt Strike. Most of them are just like, you have TeamViewer.
You can go download it for free. Hold on.
Yeah, just go download TeamViewer. Yeah, exactly. Test everything. Like seriously, test before you go in. Have even something as simple as the flags you're planning on using with SharpHound. Because if you run SharpHound and it doesn't run because you've messed up the flags, that is a detectable event, and you just burned a detectable event on nothing. So testing, go beyond payload testing. Test every, like we have an environment set up, alerts roll in. We oftentimes even just use our SOC environment. We're just like, hey, you guys have all the alerting and monitoring and stuff. We're just going to run, Bloodhound, or we're just going to run, Snaffler, whatever it is, seeing whether that gets detected, how fast it gets detected. Just knowing that in advance is incredibly helpful. And also sharing engagement sharing engagement data with your team. We do, after action reviews where we talk about, okay, what works against CrowdStrike right now, right? Like, it's like, give me the dirt. Give me like, oh, I did click once with this, or I did, zip ISO worked, or, MSI worked, or whatever. Like, just having that data on, I did this last week, it worked. Here's why you should do it. That's incredibly valuable. That's what blue teamers do. They have a whole thing called threat intelligence, and they're sharing IOCs, and they're sharing, like, they go way beyond what red teamers do. And so I think sharing that data is definitely a leg up. Also, get lucky. You just hope there's a new Spectre Ops blog post during your engagement.
How many times have you been on an engagement and it rolls around to like Saturday or Sunday, and then something drops and you're like, oh, if I just had this last week, I'd have had, whatever.
Yes, exactly. Or play the numbers game. Just run like that same phishing campaign like 8 times. or wait for the SOC to go home and get bored. They will eventually. They all have lives, maybe they don't have 24/7 coverage. So scoping, I want to talk about this. Never use stealth as a success factor. If there's no detections, that engagement has limited value for both of us. It's also unrealistic. No real attackers are going in completely undetected unless it's an environment where there's no tools, and then it doesn't matter. And that's like a finding in and of itself. The main point of a red team is about response. It's about like documenting, even if they succeeded 10 times, they failed one time, you need to tell them where they failed the one time. And that's sort of, the expectation you have to manage. And definitely defining the goals for both sides. So like if it's assumed compromise phase or if it's external phase, what are the goals for you as the blue team? What are you trying to do? Like, I know we're trying to hack you, but what are you trying to do? Are you trying to detect us? Are you trying to like block us? So like, what is your plan? Do you have monitoring on Office 365? Be like, that discussion is valuable. And blue teams, share your detections. Not only are we going to use them to try to bypass stuff, but also we want to map them to the things you detected and make sure that you actually have appropriate coverage. So, okay, we've been complaining about this for years. And we basically at Black Hills decided to stop complaining and start changing what we do. And so we made a new engagement that fixes a lot of the problems that we've outlined. Essentially, we call it continuous testing. I call it anti-SOC because I think it's cooler. John's talked about it a little bit, but it's essentially just a red team, but it lasts a year. Is basically the quickest way I can describe it. It is real world timelines. It's the same, similar, goals, similar procedures, similar testers, similar timelines, similar costs. And it just lasts forever because we can afford to wait for the SpectreOps blog post. We can afford to wait for the cool off period where the SOC is like, yeah, we're kind of sick of this phishing campaign. We're just going to move on. We can wait a month for you to forget about that phishing campaign. So we baseline, then we get weird. We really filter findings. Like, we don't really report things like SSL. We're just like, hey, unless we hacked it, we don't care about it. And there's no Word docs. It's all, an online platform for reporting. And yeah, it's basically built based on red teamer complaints. I think it's a positive thing that red teaming has gotten hard. It means that we have moved the needle, which seems like the whole goal of security in general is to actually make security better. And it's the worst feeling in the world as a security tester is you do this year over year, nothing gets better. And I'm so glad that our community here at Black Hills and just the security community in general, I think we've gotten over that. I think that for the most part, we see companies that genuinely want to improve and genuinely do, to the point where I have to do a webcast about how hard it's gotten. And that, to me, is a huge positive. So kudos to all the blue teamers and all of our customers and just anyone in the security community that's trying to make things better. It is making things better.
Thanks for watching. Achieve your next level of skills with training courses at anti-training.com.